Hello out there. This is Why Dash Flies with Colin Mahoney. It's great to have you here. Thank you so much for tuning in on this lovely Saturday afternoon for another installment of Zander's Appendix and Other Gratuitous Organs. I'm calling today's episode First and Latest Things because it features two poems written and read by me, the first of which traces its origins back ages to when I was just a wee bairn. And the second is the latest one off the line, which I'm calling Saturn Devouring His Son. Charming title, right? Well, it's borrowed from Francisco Goya's painting depicting the Roman god Saturn, who, fearing his own overthrow at the hands of his children, ate them, one by one, until his wife tricked him into eating stones and swaddling. Goya's painting is suitably horrifying and belongs to a very bleak late series known as the Black Paintings, completed between 1819 and 1823. Beyond serving as bookends, the poems actually have a few things in common. They're both period pieces of a sort. The heroes of each, if that's not too strong a word, are composite portraits of a sort, and both are institutionalized creatures and made to suffer for it. And finally, each has an unhealthy interest in building fires. You can find scores, and I mean scores, of other episodes of Why Dash Flies on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Acast, Anchor FM, and on YouTube. And now, two poems written and read by Colin Mahoney on Why Dash Flies. He appeared at our gate, a moron of low mentality, with 6 years done in almshouse cast off still. Filled with sour milk, the boy could manage 5 fair words, the rest a muddy patois only Sister Bridget could follow, or so she let on. Alas, he was Christ's dirtiest pot, but we've clipped his nails and washed his hands, and lo, his feet have quickened. There's terror yet twinkling in his winking eye. A more cheerful lad never there was, be it in the kitchen, ladling, as he says, his tarnal soup, or in the bedroom, putting all in ship shape. Lets float a clean sheet down on air, pulls 4 corners smooth as a page, patching his own cast-offs with a clever needle, playing the playground wag, his tongue looser now by the use of it. On farm detail, he's a regular all-round man, chicken man, pig man, horse man, goat man, fooling all the cows in the barn for a pailful. But the devil's in him yet, prone to tantrums, turning over tables, scratching his name into fresh walls, or worse, blackening sheet after sheet in his neat unnerving hand, pulling pages like he pulls earthworms from the dirt. He's tried 3 times to run away by some electric motive, not unlike pain. But pain brings him back, eventually. I'm afraid his father's to blame. A morally deformed character, thrice-wived and a common drunk, with vulgar charms out of a bottle, reeking of the dark quarters he came from, and will return to at the end of the day, be sure, to read and reread the book of his boundless besotted self. A machine churning with adverse energies, tending to dissolve, in the daylight, into sparrows irradiating, maddening each the others from ground to gate and back to ground again. Or that's how the boy found him on visiting days, so blessedly seldom. The boy's even taken to setting small fires while the other children sleep. But Pastor Simon put him to work in the boiler room, where he's moved by a newfound spirit, ardor to ardor superadded, until the knot of fire resolved itself, and his fevers cooled. He's kept an awful silence ever since. We close with a letter written in the spidery hand of the boy's mother, herself feeble and of simplest motive, poor dear, who labored so long in her fevers, all for an homunculus, howling with swarming faculties, like a nerve exposed to cold air, far, far too early. We've tidied her spelling, but left her omissions and idiocies for authenticity's sake. My dearest son, you'd better make up your mind to stay contented another year. I asked him to return me, and he said, will I won't. So here I am, no soup and eating leaves off the trees. So be a good boy and remain contented another year. Not a long time slipping and we'll down by the sea, a bedsheet with seagulls. Always your fondest. P.S. Don't be caught again with fire. Yes? Saturn devouring his son. It was another shattering night with Moriarty. He'd invited us to the 19th Century Club, a high, fine room where palm trees breathed into the coffered ceiling, while, more locally, fruit flies gleaned nostrils in the mouths of wine glasses, or drowned themselves in Chateau Lafite. He was completely out of control, going on and on about werewolves in Buenos Aires, and who was it? Mao said that foxes wear dark coats at night and dig holes in the ground, and how Energy clothed herself that morning and walked her mortars down a line of banana trees, made an orange gelatinous bloom of gasoline that sucked the oxygen out of the air. Moriarty, who'd always been such a flame-like man, who emerged into a room and walked right over to shake your hand and consume you, as you'd imagine a house fire would. Now he looked at us in a panic, like the tabletop was on fire. He was one of those wire-guided types, who wrestled great metal birds in mid-air, blowing the tops of banana trees, who, though wire-guided, so often disorient themselves in the end, upend themselves and find a hard sky of ground fog to fall into, or end in a crescendo of violence, self-inflicted or otherwise. He'd seen men gathered and covered in lime and fresh earth, dug up again for fresh insult, and scattered in the elephant grass like Osiris, and so hard to regather, let alone reanimate. But they managed to, and came at Moriarty and others like him in man-sized waves, a current that caught them standing or grown restless in the sideways drift of things, only to find the nearer the stronger the resistance, more rampant in the flower's heart, in the press and flush, or repulsed to pieces, or knocked back by the recoil, unloading rounds into the sky, he said. His reports had been little boxes close packed with razor blades and set to detonate when opened, releasing vast clouds of scarce paper, moving men and armor, and days turned on a close pivot because he sat and typed at his army-issue steel desk. Moriarty's sort of operation advanced by peristalsis, the way a snake incorporates a mouse. He'd conjure rain, while relations searched elephant grass for remains. He'd say, whoever it was said the dead weigh upon the living was right, at least in terms of paperwork. Some inherit the crude ability to consider things from afar, to see force administered in increased doses, and modeled in sandboxes built waist-high, and brought into the office for men to lean and breathe their smoke over, watching operations bloom bilaterally. But in the flower's compact heart, wires pressed through palms made long strands of men, he said. They'd put them in holes sunk in the ground, and they'd grind them down and introduce the opposite of rest. In that weird compact of cells swarmed by insects, or whatever it was came in to discover the palms of their feet, with rubber truncheons or straps of leather. Energy, he said, demands a basement with a far wall of logs to consume her munitions, and a floor that sloped and guttered to channel the runoff. His boiling down accelerated until he threw up in the parking lot and drove erratically away. It's a hard thing to weigh, our portion of the dark and curses. How deep our investment in the stars and the ground under our feet. What's that line about being killed by degrees? Does it refer to an increase of heat, or a screw turned, or an unwinding toward an eventual release? Character picks our schedule, I suppose. Each of us paid up for kicking against the pricks, or not, because we never did. Moriarty was a man who thought otherwise. He retired to a cabin he and his ex-wife bought with her inheritance, where night cut its blackest corridor through the coast range, and where, just like Old Blue, he started graveling little holes in the yard. He chopped wood and drank liquor, and worried fires down with a stick, grinding his block down against contrary edges, getting shavings all over his socks, until at last he laid himself down 4 paces from his cabin's front door, face first, drinking in the earth at last, and understanding at last that mankind is a vast, lumbering beast, shot fantastically in the brain, again and again and again.